5 different codes in various code systems that were already available to represent concepts from social determinants of health. So we already have all these codes that could be used, so what's the problem? It turns out that for some social risk topic areas, there are concepts that need to be expressed, but no codes to represent them. And this chart has a lot of X's in some of the key areas under food insecurity, housing instability, and transportation, where that environmental scan showed that there really weren't the codes that are needed. In other cases, there are multiple codes with overlapping meaning, so it isn't really clear which code should be used to represent a concept, such as the concept of lives in temporary housing. It would be very difficult for us to consistently choose in different systems which is the right code to be using. Some codes have been defined in a way that makes them hard to use for capturing social determinants health information cleanly. For example, mixing together environmental safety concepts like safe drinking water with food security concepts like lack of adequate food make a code like the one with the red box around it hard to use. Each code system maintains a distinct ontological framework, and it employs separate development principles and operating practices, so there's really no guarantee that the concepts needed to express social determinant of health issues across the entire care delivery and planning continuum really have codes that all work together. It's another challenge that we face. And these are the things that Gravity is hoping to address. This coding collaborative is focused on addressing those fundamental problems and meeting the need to provide coded information that can be shared throughout that care planning and delivery process. The solution is to design and find or request codes that are fit for the purpose across this entire cycle that we talked about last week. The idea behind Project Gravity is for stakeholders to come together and work in a collaborative way to establish data definitions and find or request coded concepts that maximize the consistency and the interoperability for social determinant of health information. And to do this sort of content work, I'll call it that often, content work, at the beginning of the process, not the end, so that we can avoid problems like we have experienced with smoking status, where a tremendous amount of effort went into expanding within the industry this ability to facilitate information exchange around a concept with a value set that largely has been determined now that it's all bubbled up and the information is starting to flow. And some of the secondary uses have been looking at what's coming through the pipe, like quality and research and public health, and we have determined that the data element definitions for smoking status that were introduced with meaningful use really weren't fit for purpose. And as you know, in the rulemaking that we have today, we're having to back away from those original value sets, and it really causes a lot of disruption. So we're hoping to put start with the end in mind and start with the right coded content to begin with. So it is important for us to delve a little bit deeper into this planning and delivery cycle that we're talking about. And this is where I promise to take us a little bit deeper than where we were last week, because we need to understand some essential information about the code systems that we'll be working with in this project. Care planning and delivery is a cycle, which typically leads to some challenges for perspective when we begin to discuss the information. The root cause of this challenge can be traced to where you start in the discussion. some people, when they think about this topic, they think about first starting with an evaluation activity, which produces some information that can be used to assess a person's health status. See how it looks like the way the curve starts there at the health status. I've sort of flattened out that circle and taken a linear path through the cycle. You get one view. Other people prefer to start with thinking about it in terms of the planning activity, which sets goals and then establishes interventions that need to be performed, subsequently are performed, and then evaluated to see if the patient's health status has changed. These linear perspectives can make it seem like people are talking about different things, when in fact they aren't. They're just viewing the care planning and delivery cycle from a different perspective. Within HL7, the standards development community has spent several years coming to consensus about the care planning and delivery cycle. We got stuck more than once, lost on trying to finding ourselves misunderstanding each other because of that linear effect that I just showed. This circular framework that we ended up with really helps us make sense of many different users' linear views on the information. And we would like to utilize this framework so that we can avoid reinventing the wheel in this area. I'll shift gears for a second and take us into some deeper concepts and terms. We'll be working with some terms that have emerged over time within HL7. And I'm going to offer a few basic definitions. Take some notes for yourself, and if you'd like to comment on this during the Q&A period, we welcome a lot of experts on this phone to go ahead and join in. But in the context of the project, this is the way that we're thinking about the use of these terms. Information is represented in a data structure established by a standard like HL7 CDA or FHIR. CDA calls these structures templates, while FHIR calls them resources or profiles. A data structure is made up of data elements. A data element is a unitary, well-defined unit of information. When a data element is a coded concept, meaning a concept that is drawn from a code system, as opposed to some other sort of data type like a date or an integer or perhaps a Boolean value, then that kind of data element, a coded concept, its definition uses what's called a value set to describe the range of concepts that establish its meaning. A code system, on the far right-hand side of the picture, is a set of concepts that are organized in a way that encompasses essential aspects of the concepts and assigns a code to represent that meaning. The range or set of concepts that a code system uses in the definition of a data element and is allowed to be used when representing the data element, that's called a value set definition. Each concept in a value set is represented with a code. There's another term that sometimes you'll hear used called a value set grouping, and that is simply a set of value sets. A value set grouping is used when a data element definition needs to draw concepts from multiple different code systems. So the value sets can be built off from the different code systems and then joined together with that value set grouping. I think defining, taking a few minutes to define these terms hopefully will help us all just communicate with each other more clearly as we go through the process. Here's a picture. It's small, I apologize about that, but it's an example of a FHIR resource. See if my pointer will work. Up here, it says encounter. So this is an example of an encounter data structure defined in FHIR. it is used to represent a patient encounter, a patient visit. Each of these elements that you see underneath the encounter, these are all data elements within that structure. And each data element has a data type. In this case, status is a code that's drawn from this value set here of concepts. And for example, this data element type, this means encounter type, again, a codable concept that's drawn from a value set called encounter type. And that's how these things come together. Code systems that are used for representing discrete data across the care planning cycle vary widely. There's many of them, and I'm going to cover a few today that would be relevant to those 4 activities that we identified in the cycle that we were talking about. I'd like to start with a code system that's called LOINC. This is a code system that's used to express assessment information and certain types of goals and preferences that are used in care planning. LOINC actually stands for Logical, Observation, Identifiers, and Codes. It also includes a document ontology that is used to classify different types of clinical notes and clinical concepts within a structured document. The steward is Regent Street Institute, and it's updated June and December of each year. The code system called SNOMED CT is used to express health status evaluation and outcome concepts, as well as diagnoses and interventions. It's a very broad code system and can even be used in conjunction with other code systems, like, for example, LOINC. If you've ever heard people say, LOINC is used to code the question and SNOMED is used to code the answer, it's because these 2 code systems are designed to be able to be used together as well. It isn't always true that that's exactly the relationship, but it helps to see that code systems can be used for multiple purposes and combined in different interesting ways. The steward of SNOMED is SNOMED International. However, the U.S. version is managed through the National Library of Medicine, and it's updated in March and in September. ICD-10-CM is used solely to express health concerns and diagnoses. It stands for International Classification of Disease. Clinical modifications, that's what the CM means, and 10th edition. This code system is also used in processing claims for determining medical necessity and recording external causes of injury, and ICD-10 codes are often used for determining if people qualify for the denominator or numerator in a quality measure. The steward of this code system is, in the United States, the National Center for Vital Statistics, NCVS, and the international version is managed by the World Health Organization. It's updated annually on October 1st. CPT and HCPCS, pronounced HCPCS, they are used to express interventions that are planned and performed. CPT stands for Current Procedure Terminology, and it's commonly used for billing services from different patient settings, as well as for professional services that are provided in the inpatient setting. This code system is copyrighted by the American Medical Association, and it cannot be used without their permission. The codes indicate not only what service was performed, but the work, the risk, and the skill that's involved in providing the service. The HSPC or HCPCS code system stands for Healthcare Common Procedure System. And this code system initially was used for Medicare claims, but it's now used by commercial payers as well. It includes concepts that are not covered by CPT, it sort of encompasses CPT, but has some additional concepts that are needed for describing services that are delivered for Medicare patients. And CPT is considered to be a part of the broader HCPCS code system. It is updated, it's maintained by CMS, and it's updated annually on January 1st with some quarterly updates. I just described this material at a high level to get a flavor for how these code systems are positioned to support representing concepts around the care planning cycle, the meaning that's involved and associated with these different codes from those code systems tell us about where we are in the delivery and planning processes. But we recorded some additional information if you'd like to delve deeper into them, 5 to 7 minute YouTube videos on each of those code systems that you can get from the Confluence site. The link here is on the slide. And we also just wanted to point out that there are many other code systems that are used in information exchange, but the 5 that we identified were picked for gravity because they are closely aligned with many of the other efforts that are within HL7 to develop current standards like CCDA and U.S. Core Fire Profiles, and where we're trying to establish a nice glide path into this other work. We are attempting to utilize code systems that are already planned for in this other work. The Interoperability Standards Advisory that's produced by the ONC is another great place to go if you have questions about what code systems are appropriate for use. According to standards-based exchange, you can get background information on the readiness and applicability of code systems by referencing that resource. At this point, Lynette, I think we wanted to take a break and ask for some discussion. We have a great variety of experts on the phone. Anybody would like to chime in and add to the discussion or ask questions about any of the definitions and material that we covered so far. Let's open up the line for 5 or 7 minutes or so and see what questions we can take and what discussion our participants would like to initiate.
Okay. There's a question in the chat about, are there any examples of data element as a codable concept other than ICD? Are there other international codes? Or is I'm sorry, that's 2 different questions. The first question was, are there any examples of data element as a codable concept?
Sure. You know, we have a stacked deck. If you notice, we broke today's presentation into 2 pieces because the material was pretty dense. And next week's presentation will completely focus on delving deeper into data element definition, and we'll be showing several examples. I'll be covering the definition around how to create a well-formed data element definition based on the ISO 11179 standard that gives us guidance on how to do that. And we will be giving examples looking at some of the code systems, like for example, I'll take you into LOINC and we'll look at a data element and the way it's defined there. I'll also show you the easier method for how we will be expressing data element definitions using a spreadsheet that we've created as an easy submission form that will help you think through shaping your information into a data element definition type format so that you can submit it to include with our work.
Excellent. Thanks, Lisa. And that question had come from Henry Peretta. Henry, thank you for that question. The next question that we are seeing is, other than ICD, are there other international codes?
SNOMED is an international code system. I know we have some code system representatives on the phone who may want to chime in and talk about that. I mentioned that there is a flavor of a code system that's also managed by the WHO. SNOMED CT has an international version. Not sure about LOINC, but I think we have some representatives from Regent Street who may want to answer that. Many of the code systems do support that, but also many of them are U.S. focused. And the focus of the Gravity project is in the U.S. realm. And so that is a reason why we've looked to the ISA, that Interoperability Standards Advisory, on code systems that would be appropriate for use in the United States.
Okay, and thank you, Carrie Nicholas, for that question.
Yeah, and feel free, like if you're on the line and you have some information to contribute, feel free to chat in. It doesn't have to be a question, but if you can contribute, perhaps you know the answer to a question that someone just asked, feel free to chat the answers in as well, and we can get a little bit more of a dialogue going that way.
Yes. And the next question is from Jenny Harvell. Will the Gravity Project consider only open source code systems?
Well, it is our preference to look that way. You know, the openness and accessibility to the value sets that are created off from the code systems are certainly taken into consideration. But I did mention the code system CPT, which has some additional requirements around its use. Because it's readily available for billing, it is a place where those concepts do become available and are also used in quality measures at times. And so that is the one place that we're looking at, including concepts from a code system that is not a purely open, but all the other ones that we mentioned are.
Thanks, Lisa. And Swapna has her hand up, so I'm going to go ahead and open up the line.
Thank you, and I actually just put some answers in the chat as well. But sorry, I work for Reagan Streep on LOINC content, and LOINC is actually an international standard, and it's used basically all over the world. You know, starting with lab, but really expanding into a lot of other areas as well. And it's actually required for use in many countries, and you can find more information on our website. But we also have translations in many different languages as well. So LOINC is definitely international.
Thanks, Swapna.
Thank you.
And we have a question from...
time for a couple more, yeah.
Yes, ma'am. We have a question from Rachel Barron asking if we can explain what HL7 and FIRE are, because there are probably many folks on this call who were not able to attend the first call and may not be familiar with those.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. I appreciate that. Every time I use acronyms, that if anybody doesn't know, that's a great reason to raise your hand and have us back up to that. HL7 stands for Health Level 7, and it's the name of a standards development organization that is very active in the United States and around the world. There are international affiliates around the world that are a part of HL7, and the organization brings together, it's a nonprofit, brings together numerous participants from all different stakeholder areas, EHR vendors, researchers, payers, just the whole gamut of health IT stakeholders come and participate to iron out common approaches to representing information and sharing information in standard ways. They have three primary product families that are used within the health IT ecosystem. One is called V2, stands for version 2, and it's used to do a kind of a rudimentary messaging protocol. Then there's another one that's called CDA. It stands for Clinical Document Architecture, and that standard is named in meaningful use legislation as the method by which much of this available information that can come out of the EHRs and be shared with other systems, CDA is the standard that will facilitate that kind of information exchange. And finally, the newest product to enter the family at HL7 is a more modern, what's called RESTful, which gets at the technology that's used. It means fast healthcare interoperability resources. So it's pronounced FIRE, but it's spelled F-H-I-R. And this is a technology that is enabling, it's amazing. It has a lot of capabilities that make the standard more accessible. A very large community has cropped up in a very short amount of time to learn how to use this standard, and it is rapidly becoming an open API, application interface, mechanism that all different kinds of systems can support very easily. It's very modern. Anybody coming out of school today with a computer science degree would know how to interact with information this way. And so it's kind of the future of how HL7 and the health IT industry feels that health information will be shared. Thanks, Rachel.
Thanks, Lisa. That was probably very helpful for a lot of people. This one slipped past me earlier, and I apologize. This is from Ajay Gupta asking, are you looking to code clinical data for sharing within healthcare or also with potential partners outside of healthcare?
The scope of our project right now, I'll invite Siren or perhaps Evelyn to think beyond that, but it's my understanding. Well, let me just do that rather than answering. Is there someone from the larger team that would like to participate in the discussion? Just take that question.
This is Evelyn. I can chime in. Or unless this is Caroline. Yeah. Can you hear me? Yes.
Yes.
Great. So we are very much interested.
Caroline, did we lose you? Oh dear.
I can hear you, Lynette.
Caroline, are you on?
Did she get unmuted?
Yes, she's unmuted. Oh, shoot. Caroline, do we have you back?
Yeah, if we lose Caroline, perhaps Caroline could chat her answer so that people could get that too. And then Evelyn, if you just want to
sure,
just mention about the scope, I think that could keep the discussion going.
Yes, so I do want to acknowledge, and Lisa, as you presented in the care delivery, care planning cycle, is we are initially, looking at what are those social risk concepts that need to be documented within clinical settings to support upstream activities as well. So knowing that these are many of the social risk concepts, social needs are documented predominantly in community-based organizations, but we want to be able to identify those that are relevant and important to document within clinical settings. And our intent is if we can identify, we do want codes, if we identify codes to represent those concepts within those 4 activities you mentioned, Lisa, we would want them to also be the applicability of them for other activities in community-based organizations, and said, for use for quality reporting, public health reporting, and research. So we have to keep that in mind, and that's why we have encouraged this community to be broad, bringing across multi-stakeholder groups. And again, pitch for our presentation last week, and Lisa, you alluded it to the fact, like when you talk about smoking status, that it was those values, those codes were identified in silo, not thinking through of who else would be using them or needing them. And that's why we encourage everyone to contribute to this work.
Thanks, Evelyn. Do we have time for one more question, Lisa?
Sure.
Okay, this one is from Matt Bishop asking, Unified Medical Language System has a meta-thesaurus API that seems to create a mapping between the code systems that you listed. Is this a tool that is used frequently for data exchange?
Thank you very much. It is. In fact, it's one of the most useful ways to get between SNOMED CT and ICD-10, which is a hard map to make. So we are finding, as the industry has settled in on some of these what I'll call kind of cornerstone code systems, that mappings between them are beginning to be established and maintained as standards artifacts themselves, and they become a nice resource that you can get from UMLS.
Okay, this is Lynette. I'm scrolling through just to make sure that I haven't. Here's another question. This one is from Richard.
One more,
Bookman.
and then we'll.
Yes. Okay.
Yep.
This one's from Richard Bookman asking, who is responsible for asking patients if they want the information to be coded and shared?
Evelyn, do you want to take a stab at that?
So this is so my point earlier that we want all multi-stakeholder groups to participate in this, including patient advocates, consumers, caregivers, really to bring that patient perspective to mind, because as we get down to the data definitions, we want to keep in mind, we want to be conscious of the sensitivity around how these concepts are worded, how these questions are asked, how a patient, a beneficiary will respond to these types of questions. We've heard about, the topic comes up often about making sure that this work will not discriminate or cause judgment. So we have to keep that in mind as criteria. So as a community, always thinking through as we dive down and achieving consensus on these data sets within the 3 domains, always keeping that in mind, because we don't want to come up with a data set that it's not what a patient will feel comfortable answering and will lead to adverse outcomes.
Thanks, Evelyn. And Richard, thanks for that question. I think I will call it out as a parking lot thing that I will call back to next week when I show you some data element definitions and we talk about an aspect of a proper definition that includes some instructions around collecting information for that data element. And I'll show you an example how a data element definition has anticipated the possibility that a patient may not want to answer the question. And this demonstrates that we have the ability to think all the way through some of those questions to even allow for a possible answer that the patient didn't want to answer. And I'll show you a little bit more about that when we delve into the details on data element definition next week. Thank you, Richard. I think, Evelyn, Lynette, if it's okay, I'd like to move on with the last module of information to share, and then we should have time for a few more questions at the end.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So my grand finale today is to take you through the process of where we are in the Gravity Project to the crescendo moment that we're really all hoping for, which is this information, social determinant of health information, being discreetly coded and captured and shared along with the other health information, medical record information that is being shared today to really facilitate the care delivery and planning cycle. So I'm going to take you through 4 steps. I call this module my How a Bill Becomes a Law module, so that you can really get a picture of how this low-level work that we will be doing around data element definition, how it finds its way to enable the goal that we talked about at the beginning, was facilitating coded information for social risks. So we'll go through 4 steps, and think of it as I'm really opening the hood here and showing you how this will happen. So you start out with a well-formed data definition. And I apologize, the slide is small, but I had to make some choices between trying to navigate to other places. We put the link on the bottom of the slide. So if you're interested in going into LOINC and looking at this data element, we'll be talking about it some more next week. This is an example of a data element that has attained a well-formed definition, and then we've worked with a code system to represent the concept of the data element itself, which is coded here in this code, and we have represented the value set, which defines the range of concepts that could be captured in this data element right here in what LOINC calls an answer list. So you start out with your concepts, what our community is going to be talking about. We get to a place where we have good formed definitions, and then we work with a code system to get those data elements to be well defined. That's step 1. The next thing that happens, that once those data elements are well defined, we have the ability to create these value sets that draw from code systems to say that the answer list could be identified with this code, this code, this code, or this code. And I'll get into the details next week about some different ways that you can define these value sets. I just wanted to show you this picture is from the Value Set Authority Center. I think Richard had mentioned something about UMLS and the resources that are available from the National Library of Medicine. And the VSAC is one of their tools that we use to make a technical artifact that is a value set or a grouping value set that pulls two value sets or more together. And these value sets become available artifacts that system programmers and the people who are responsible for creating specifications, that's how they can really use them. And they become publicly available and open in a way that everyone can get access to them, and that's step number 2. Step number 3 is for the standards like CDA. Here I'm specifically talking about a particular implementation guide within CDA. This is called CCDA. It stands for Consolidated CDA, a family of templates, data structures that have been defined to enable system interoperability. So in the 3rd step, we actually can create a data structure. This is an observation type structure. It's actually the observation that's used to represent social history observations. And in this data structure, we can pull together the use of codes. So here, for example, you can have a code that comes from a certain value set called social history types. And you might have a value that represents what the, which code would come from that value set that goes along with a particular social history observation. This picture is really showing you the way CDA makes some templates data structures, but the same thing is going on with that newer standard called FHIR. Here you see an observation type of data structure, and it's pulling together different data elements, including codes and categories of codes. You can see the value set being used here that they're binding to, coming from LOINC. And this data structure sets the set of constraints that implementers will use when they write their systems and when they begin to create instances of information that can be shared with another system. So that's step 3, is pulling the data elements into the data structures in the standard specifications. And then finally, in step 4, those systems that have utilized those specifications, they begin allowing data out of their system to be shared with another system, or they take data in that has come to their system from another system. And what I'm showing you on the screen is a picture of something called XML. It's a type of computer language that's used to represent data. And here you can see this is an entry of information that is using one of those observation structures to represent the concept that I showed you before in LOINC. Here's that number that we looked at that's the data concept code that means current education attainment. And then in here you can see the computer has carried in the value element a coded data piece of information, coded with one of those LOINC codes that should mean master's degree. That concept comes out of, not sure I got that one quite right, but I made this last night, so don't hold me to that. I'm sure Swapna's checking on that right now. That this code, I might not have changed that code correctly, but I wanted you to see. I mean, that'd be a good test for next week. We'll look and see if Lisa made an errata right here, because we'll be able to look this concept up in this LOINC code system and actually determine if its meaning is associated with master's degree. And that's really how computers are able to use this information. There's also, of course, human narrative that goes along with this up higher in the XML document. I didn't have enough room to show you all of that, but there's human narrative that is the kind of information that you and I are all used to reading and interacting with the bonus of these machine processable data entries that really allow us to do some of the things that we envision and dream about doing, to be able to consistently find, aggregate, work with the data that we'd never be able to really consistently pull out with natural language processing on the narrative text. So there's the big finale. This is what we're going for, is a place where social determinants of health information can readily be expressed, just like many of the other data elements that have already been named in the what's called Common Clinical Data Set, or now being proposed in the U.S. core data for interoperability, to be able to use all those same exact mechanisms, the same exact standards, but to deliver the coded content that's needed to have social risk information become a part of that big picture. So over the next few months, that's what we're going to be doing in terms of this detailed work. After next week's presentation, to dig into data element definition a little bit further, Evelyn will be going over, we'll have a sort of a phase to work on some use case development and talk about patient personas and patient stories, so that we have a common context for discussing the coded concepts that we want to be able to share. And then we will just march through gathering and adjudicating our ideas for what information needs to be coded in the food security, food insecurity, housing instability, and transportation access areas. Lynette, at this point, I think we're ready for some more questions. If anything else has come in the chat box, or discussion, if people would like to contribute, please, yes. It's an open forum.
Yes, we have a couple. This one is from Kelly Lou, which I apologize for not seeing earlier, asking, are we going to go over the applications of the coding systems, for example, ICD-10 on claims data and CPT on claims data? Does SNOMED only work on EHR like LOINC?
So claims data is tricky. It exists, obviously, because everybody needs to get paid, but we are trying to take a clinical information focus. And so wherever we do have the ability to map between and to establish SNOMED concepts as well, we try to invest some energy into making sure that the concepts that we need can be represented in SNOMED CT, as well as some of these more claims-oriented code systems. And that's where some of the mappings, like Richard was talking about, really helps us out, because we need to be able to go back and forth. EHRs, in general, take more of a clinical view, and sometimes they don't even have access to, within the way the system is built, because often the claims sort of perspective is happening on a practice management side of the system. And so we definitely are trying to make sure that there's clinical representations also available, so that systems that are operating in the clinical space will be able to help collect this information as well. I don't think that we'll be spending a great deal of focus on any sort of tutorials around how to code or how to use claims information or code for that, but we will be getting a little bit deeper into understanding how those coding claims type code systems would be used to represent concepts that we can use for the purposes of assessment, diagnosis, planning, and treatment.
Thanks, Lisa. And we are seeing a lot of conversation around 211, and there were some specific comments about how it's cross-indexed to the social determinants of health, so that social services needs can be linked to social service referrals. And there was a question from Maribel Marin about, is this the kind of linkages, or are these the kind of linkages that this group is trying to make to up and downstream clinical service provision?
Boy, I would ask if Maribel is comfortable raising her hand to be unmuted. I'd love to hear a little bit more. I'm not that familiar with 211. I'd love to hear more about that. Maybe the folks that are chatting can share a little with the larger group.
Sure, Maribel, I have unmuted you.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Yes, so, you know, there was a couple of 211s that were part of the CMS-funded Accountable Health community programs, and part of the work that 211 Los Angeles was invited to do, because we're the editors of the taxonomy,
was to crosswalk that taxonomy to the social determinants of health. And so the assessments that were created are linked through the taxonomy codes. And, it's very technical, and we can certainly do a tour of the taxonomy, to a smaller group, and you can decide what of that might be shared to a larger group. But what I would say is that, while those linkages have been made, there's another step to it, right? Because we still need to further code the outcomes. But seems to be outcomes already coded in what we're talking about now. So I think it's an important and timely effort to look at how all these different systems that we want to link are coding things so that we don't interrupt what's already happening, and instead we're crosswalking, right? Because it sounds to me like there is a huge opportunity to leverage what's already been done.
Yes, that is what we are hoping. And Maribel, thank you for volunteering. One of the things that we've tried to do is to make some recordings so that this large group, it's really hard for everybody to get together at the same time. So we'd love to learn more about the details that you are able to share with us, and perhaps we could do a little recording on that topic, and then folks that are also interested in delving into that a little bit deeper would have that material that they could access asynchronously.
Great. And Georgia Sales, who is the creator of the taxonomy and the editor and the person who did the crosswalking, is participating in these conversations, so she can help also do something that's easy to consume.
And do you know, Maribel, if that is an open and freely available crosswalk technology?
The crosswalk, I believe, is available. The taxonomy does have a license fee. We are talking about different approaches to that right now, but for the most part,
I say July.
Yes. You go to 211 taxonomy, you can see everything about the structure and what it contains and what it's all about.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. We're getting a little bit of noise from that in the background.
Folks who are not unmuted, or who are not muted.
Is the one we talked about the other day?
Yeah.
I think we should probably close with that. I don't know if you have the ability to just sort of remute everyone, Linnell, but yourself. I think you could close us so we'll finish on time.
I will. Go to the next slide for me, please, Lisa. All right. Thank you all, again, who have joined the project to date. We really appreciate your participation, and we encourage you to go ahead and join on the wiki as a committed member or an other interested party so that we can stay in touch with you, and this is how we will be managing our communications moving forward. So if you want to hear from us, go ahead and join the project, and we have the link here. Again, we will send out a follow-up email that has all of these links in it. And again, even if you're not sure about your level of participation, please go ahead and at least sign up as an other interested party, and you can change your membership status at any time. We appreciate comments, all your comments, and we have been adding those to our wiki materials on a weekly basis, so please go ahead and continue sending us your thoughts and your ideas and your comments on the existing project deliverables, and we will continue making updates to those. And you're welcome to send us information about relevant work. And if you have extensive comments, please email those to us at gravityproject@emiadvisors.net rather than posting them in the wiki comment form, because you can attach things to emails. So without any further delay, we will go ahead and adjourn this call. We appreciate you all being here, and we will talk next week. Thank you all.
Okay. Shall we continue our conversation now? I just